Anyway, I just want to wrap this thing up. This whole riff about our schools, and then take your calls on it. I closed with punctuating that with drugs in our schools. I am very concerned. We've seen a couple of mass shootings here recently. Again, not necessarily in our schools, but we're seeing these happening increasingly. And I have yet to know of a school shooting, for example, that was not in some way related to kids taking psychiatric medication. Now, it may well be that they were taking the psychiatric medication because they were nuts, to use the clinical term, and they needed it. On the other hand, there are many of these medications are black labeled. They are labeled with a suicide warning. If you take this drug, it will increase suicidal ideation. And a lot of these kids, thinking, and a lot of these kids, in my humble opinion, are committing suicide by cop, and in some cases adults as well, or they're committing suicide by going out in a flame, in a blaze of glory, taking 20 people with them. And I think it's just a disaster. I think it's just a disaster that we are medicating kids when we should be fixing our schools. Here's what we're confronted with. You've got kids who don't fit into the way that schools teach. Schools teach a particular way, kids learn a different way. So the way that the kids are being taught is this factory line assembly model. And at the same time, the way that they learn is more highly interactive. So there's a disconnect between the way that we're teaching kids in many cases and the way that they learn. Some kids have to learn. Some kids learn very well by just sitting and listening. Other kids have to see what's going on. Other kids have to do what's going on. They're highly kinesthetic. So we're not matching learning styles to teaching styles. So instead we say, instead of changing our classrooms, instead of putting the money into going to smaller classrooms, we're going to go inside the brains of these kids and put a chemical in there and change them so that they adapt their brain, their learning style, to the teaching style of the school. And I frankly just think that's wrong. So in my mind, most of the problems with our educational system are solved by three straightforward things. Number one, rebuild the infrastructure of our schools. Make our schools more modern, larger, more effective. Make it easier for teachers to use the tools and technology. Number two, pay our teachers professional rates so that a single teacher with a single salary is solidly in the middle class. And can raise a family and not worry about it, and the whole thing. And number three, give our teachers more freedom. Get rid of No Child Left Behind. Localize control of schools and localize the teachers' unions as well. The labor part of this, the teachers' part of this, and to the extent that we can do this with charter schools, fine. I'm not opposed to charter schools in principle. I am very concerned, however, about the privatization of our schools, which creates the ghettoization of our public schools, and particularly I'm very concerned about for-profit corporations getting into education. I've seen it up front and personal, and it can be very, very ugly. So let's take your call. Susan in Independence. Is that Independence, Oregon?
Independence, Oregon.
Hey,
Tom,
Susan.
yeah,
What's
I'm
up?
just south of you. Hey, I got two things I want to say. Number one, the first piece of family history that my entire family has is of an ancestor in the Massachusetts colony who paid his subscription to the free school in 1640, so that every child in that community got an education.
Yep, and communities used to do this. They'd get together, they'd hire the school marm, bring her in from out of town, and build a schoolhouse, and it was always a community effort.
Yeah, everybody paid for it. So I get really ticked off at the Republicans who say, oh, we need private schools, we need vouchers, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
BS. It's not American as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
The second thing is this idea of merit pay for teachers. Philosophically, I don't mind it, but I have a friend who teaches a split shift at two schools down here in Albany, Oregon. One principal loves her. One principal hates her.
Right.
So does she get, great pay at one place and cut from the other.
Yeah.
The only way merit pay can work is if they find a way so that it's not the best brown noser that is promoted.
Right, and there are no objective standards because kids are not a standardized product.
That's right. So I'll get off the air and let your next caller in.
Thank you, Susan. But your points are very well made, and it's why I oppose merit pay, broadly speaking. Frank in Los Angeles. Hey, Frank.
Well, I'm against merit pay because it rewards teachers that come from schools where the students are self-starters, and it penalizes the teachers that work in the inner cities where you have a tough school, you know, and there are gangs and all that. I mean, plus the fact is that when you start privatizing schools, they're so selective that they only pick their self-starters. They don't pick.
Right.
If you're a troublemaker, you can't get enrolled in those schools.
Yep.
And,
Have you ever heard of merit pay for police officers?
Oh.
What about merit pay for firefighters? How about merit pay for members of Congress? You know, Frank, you're spot on. I mean, you know, let's say merit pay for members of. Come on, people do these jobs because they love them and they should be paid enough that they can make a decent living, period, end of sentence. Merit pay is a conservative meme that carries with it two assumptions. Number one, that you should pay teachers poorly and make them work to get up into the middle class, which is wrong. And number two, that teachers are motivated by money in their paycheck. Now, everybody likes a little money in their paycheck, but that's not why people go into education. And frankly, it's not why most people go into most fields. And it shouldn't be. So merit pay, thank you very much. I'll pass on it. Steve in Sussex, Wisconsin. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I largely agree with your goals that you state, but I'm troubled, and I'm with you against private education because private education system is inflationary. It introduces an inflation rate that is approximately twice the rate of the CPI. So it's the law of economics shows that if private education grows to a certain level in an education system, it will be pricing out a large segment of the population.
Well, it's just like private health care. As long as there's somebody in there who's got to skim money off the top for dividends for shareholders and CEOs, it's going to cost more.
Exactly. Here is what I have problems with your localization message that you were citing. I think the 18th century Prussian motivation for public schools. Let me read you a few words from the 2003 Graz Declaration of the European University Association. Mm-hmm. The purpose of a European dimension to quality assurance in higher education is to promote mutual trust and improve transparency while respecting the diversity of national context and subject areas. What I'm trying to say is that the United States is one nation, and there is more to education than to teach kids how to become decent human beings and do a job, learn science, math, and all that. They need to they need to understand the public good. And as such, you know, they need to understand, and there need to be standards. You know, for instance, this is beyond just like an employer finding a lawyer or a doctor that's educated the same way in one part of the country.
But that has to do, Steve, that has to do with curriculum, not the structure of the school, not the size of the classroom or the technology available to the teachers or how much the teachers are paid.
Oh, I agree with you on that. Yeah. But it has to be standardized nationally, and internationally has to be also coordinated.
Well, I think there need to be certain minimum thresholds. Absolutely, I think that we need to teach the commons. We need to teach, and that's where we have a national debate, because you're going to have conservatives who say, well, we need to teach, Frederick von Hayek, and we need to teach Milton Friedman, and I'm saying no, we need to teach John Maynard Keynes.
American Constitution. That's what we need to teach. Yeah,
absolutely. Civics. It's and the history of the labor movement, and a lot of things that have been stripped out of our public education system in the United States since the Reagan era, since the right-wingers went on their campaign to destroy public education in the United States. And I mean, it even got so absurd that Bill Bennett, who had come out against there being a Federal Department of Education, was made the head of the Federal Department of Education. I mean, that's how crazy it gets. And Steve, thank you for the call. And this is what we've got to back away from. Yes, there have to be certain minimum thresholds. Yes, there need to be certain baselines. And yes, and perhaps most importantly, we have to recognize that in some very poor states, they're going to need help from the rest of us. And some very rich areas and rich states, you know, they need less help from the rest of us. But that said, there are also, you know, local school districts and local teachers need to have a fair degree of autonomy.